As far back as I can remember, passwords soon made their way into cheat codes, using them to give us the edge in games, just having a rather silly effect. Cheat codes were part of early gaming, from consoles to PCs. In this episode of Punser's Gaming Docs, we're going to explore the history of cheat codes. In 1971, the very first cheat code was created, and it was in a game called Computer Space. As the arcade machine was starting up, you held two buttons and the game would let you start with 14 points. However, in the 1980s is when they really took off. They were primarily used by the developer to test the game before putting it out to the public. Some codes were used to help the developer defeat their own game, or to test part of the game for bugs. Since most of these codes were used internally, they were often personal to the developer, such as the code for Manic Miner, which was a developer's driver's license. Back then, cheat codes were often called pokes and were created by the user. The poke command was used in early computers to alter the memory, giving the ability to change the score stats and other things within the game. In 1986, the infamous Konami code was introduced by Hashimoto. After he figured out that the home port of Gradius was too hard for players, so he input a code that when entered would give players 30 lives. Hashimoto is quoted as saying, "The arcade version of Gradius is really difficult. I never played it that much, and there was no way I could finish the game, so I inserted the so-called Konami code." It wasn't really discovered until the NES game Patrick came out in 1987. Now it has been a part of games like Half-Life and Bioshock as a way to pay homage to it. As people realized the popularity of cheat codes and altering bits and pieces of the game's programming, companies started to come up with cheat devices to help with altering the memory and code of the game, often used to alter anything in the game as well. The most common and remembered of these was the infamous Game Genie by Codemasters. You first put in the game cartridge into the Game Genie unit itself, then put the whole thing into the NES. Once you turned on the system, you were greeted by a screen asking you to input a code that you found in a book that came with the Game Genie itself. What the Game Genie did was actually alter memory within the game cartridge itself and tell the NES what to use. For example, if you were to enter the code SXIOBO on the Game Genie code entry screen for Super Mario Bros., you'd have infinite lives for both. However, Nintendo didn't like any product that came out to modify the NES or the games themselves, so much so that they put a lock chip in the console. Ever notice that anything Nintendo approved had the seal of approval? Well, the Game Genie never got that seal, since Nintendo had major issues with the Game Genie altering anything with their game. So in 1991, to stop them from being sold, Nintendo sued Blue, and the Game Genie was no more. However, other companies created their own version of the Game Genie, such as the Action Replay and the Game Shark. Both did the same thing the Game Genie did. In the 90s, game developers started to realize that cheat codes were getting big, and that gamers enjoyed using them. So much so that they left them in intentionally. Some were just rather silly, like Big Head Mode and NBA Jams, and others were used to get around censorship, like the infamous Blood Code and the Sega version of Mortal Kombat. Let's look at some of the more famous cheat codes that have been used throughout the years. If you enter your name in a Zelda in the registration screen in Legend of Zelda, you start the game at the second level. In the NES version of Final Fantasy, once you get the ship in game, hold down the A button and press the B button a few times until you get a puzzle popping up. Solve the puzzle and you'll get rewarded with guild and other items. Just like in Gradius, in contrast, if you enter the Konami code at the title screen, you'll get 30 lives instead of 3. In Kid Icarus, if you enter the word packing, spelled P-A-K-I-N-G, 4 times as your password, you'll get loaded with everything you need to use to successfully play the game. In Technobowl, if you want an invisible team, just enter 397BSFA5 as a password. Some codes, however, were just meant as jokes, and one in particular, such as entering 800-422-2602 as password in Punch-Up. All you'll get is a busy signal. The reason for it is back then it was the Nintendo customer service number. If you think Mega Man 2 was too tough after dying several times, just enter this code and you'll get every weapon in the game. A5, B2, B4, C1, C3, C5, D4, D5, and E2. And in Metroid, if you enter Justin Bailey as the password, you get to play as Shamus without the power suit, but you still get to keep your weapon. But one code, when entered into Metroid, has some different effects depending on what system you put it into. And that is, engage Ripley, motherfucker. If you enter this within the original cartridge, it crashes the game and you have to restart the console. If you enter it in the Game Boy version of the game, it would crash the game and send you back to the title screen. If you enter it into the 3DS version of the game, it will break your system altogether. You could try to reset it, but you might as well just buy a new system. If you entered into the NES Classic Edition of the game, it brings up a message. C7, an error has occurred. If the problem persists, please make a note of the error code and visit support.nintendo.com. And you'll have to hard reset the system. If you still get the message, your system is a brick. Cheat codes are not just a thing for console games. PC games had their own set of cheat codes as well. In Doom, if you enter the letters I, D, QE during gameplay at any time, you'll enter God mode. In Warcraft 2, if you enter the word glittering prizes, you get extra cash, and in Warcraft 3, if you enter who is your daddy, you enter God mode. So that was the brief history of cheat codes. Do you have any cheat codes you remember back in the day? If so, please say so in the comments. This is Paul saying peace out and stay frosty.